Just a second, guys. Getting the light. That's better. Let me know how the sound is. Still fine-tuning all this stuff. Well, welcome to the first official QA session about amps. I'm going to try to remember to look there, but a lot of the times I'm going to be looking down here where the iPad is so I can see your questions and all that. So, hello, everyone. Here I is. Hola to everyone. Thank you very much. Mark on the Excalibur front panels. Yeah, I'm waiting to hear from the new guy. And hopefully I will have some good news on that. What happened was the previous guy, I guess I threw away the bad ones, sent me a whole bunch of botched panels with misshapen graphics. And they were a no-go, and it's really hard to get this done to my quality standard in small quantities at a price that we can all afford, because every high cost for every little thing raises the cost of the app. So I've been in touch with a guy I think is going to be a solution. But when I'm asking about ordering quantities 10, quantity 20, you're kind of a low priority for them. So hopefully I'll hear back soon. There were some questions at the very beginning that I can't see now because people were asking them before I was live on here. There was a question about a Carvin and some other amp and what the value is. I don't know what the value of those amps are. I don't keep up with the used prices. It's a crazy game. It changes all the time. Someone was asking about an 81 Bassman 20 watt. I've never seen one. There was a lot of weird stuff happening in the very early 80s at Fender, some very short-lived models. It's hard to know what everything is. And why don't I like the Trainer YGM3? Now, I have been told by some Trainer fans, by the way, this chair, this drum throne has gotten really squeaky over the years. I need to replace it. So it's going to be joining in the conversation every time I move. The YGM3, I've been told by some guys, started off as a really great amp in the early years of the run, and began to have problems in the later run of the production. I suppose the ones I've had in, which were pretty much garbage and needed $400 or $500 worth of work to be made to be playable, were the later production runs. So given the inherent low cost of them, people were selling them for $300, and that it needs $400, $500 worth of work to be a good amp for the next 20 years, it didn't make sense to me. And the circuit's not that great. Whereas a Bassmaster is a phenomenal amp that'll hang with any Marshall or Fender ever made. It could be worth putting money into. All right, let's see. Jason, I am a handsome man. Thank you very much. I feel handsome now, at least. I have a 64 Super Reverb. How can I reduce the treble white noise when I bring it up to 6 or 10? That's, first of all, I don't do that paid top comment thing. So if you have a question and I don't answer it, ask it again because they scroll so fast. Plate resistors, lead dress, DC on the board. These all play a factor. Sometimes it's just corrosion in the insulation of the wires. Dirty tube sockets, noisy tubes, all these add up, and you can have a little bit of improvement if you fix each one, and cumulatively you get a much quieter sound. That said, once you get above 7 on the treble on most amps, you will get some white noise. It's just tubes have a certain noise level, and resistors have what's called thermal hiss. You can get it quieter if you use metal films, but a well-functioning Fender with carbon comps from, say, 64 should not be hissy or hum or buzz or make ugly noises. But it takes a lot of little things to get it right. When we will have a live stream with Brad. Brad does live streams all the time. If the two of us doing it together, he's in Australia, so it's a morning Sam, evening Ralph kind of thing. I'm going to bed as he's waking up and vice versa. We just catch each other in the middle, Have I ever owned or bonded with a PRS guitar? I owned a PRS SE, the single cut, and I did not get along with that. And I've tried some other SEs, and to me, the SEs tend to have very floppy necks. The mahogany is not that dense. I mean, I've got an SG right there behind me, and I can make the neck move a little bit if I want it to, but it's not as bad as some SGs on a good mahogany neck guitar. And I would include some of many of the actual Paul Reed Smiths with it. You know, the neck's stable. So if I play this low E and bend, this doesn't go down. But on the SE I had, anytime I bent a string or did a double stop like that, the low E and A would just go down and pitch a lot like I had a whammy, and I didn't have a bar on there. So I never bonded with that. And, you know, I've met Paul. He's a really nice guy, real smart guy, successful. You know, I admire him a lot for a lot of his accomplishments in a very difficult industry. But I've never bonded with any of his guitars. About 2 years ago, when I was 2.5 years ago, when I was on the search for something with humbuckers, I ended up with the SG and then that Les Paul and now the 335. I had borrowed a 245 single cut, or maybe it was a double cut. Maybe it was I don't remember if it was single cut or double cut. It might have been a Ted McCarty, and it was a really good guitar, but I didn't think it had the right voice for what I was looking for. It was a little bit too bright, a little too snappy. Let's see. Brad, you do anyone. You're married now, though. You need to think about other things. Currently building a single-ended EL34 amp. Solid-state rectifier. Should use a standby switch or a thermistor. That's a deep subject. The primary reason to use standby is if your filter capacitors are not rated for the voltage present in the amp when there is no load, when the output tubes have not warmed up. So if you have a 500 volt cap and you're at 560 volts on the B plus when the tubes are not drawing current, you need a standby. If you're at 485 volts and you have 500 volts, you're right at the edge where you probably should have a standby. If you're at 450 with no load and you have 500 volt caps, you're okay. That's why a lot of times you'll see two caps in series, 350, 400 volt caps in series. So that first node is 700 to 800 volts potential to handle that. And the standby switch would then be after that in, say, a super reverb. A lot of amps, you don't need a standby switch because the B plus is much lower than the caps rating. Some companies cheap out on caps, and they can get away with that because they use a standby. Thermistors, inrush current limiters aren't really that necessary. Any amp that has a GZ34 or 5V4G or a few other tube rectifiers, you don't need standby because you will not have any B plus flowing from the rectifier tube until after that tube is warmed up. It takes that rectifier tube longer to warm up than it does for your power tubes to warm up. So by the time any DC is flowing out of there, your power tubes are already drawing current. And you know, so standby, I really think it was a cost-saving move by Leo because he didn't want to spend the money for very high voltage caps in 57, 58 when he came out with the high power twin and the Bassman. So he put in a standby switch, and that was on the two top of the line Fender models. And that continued through the brown and blonde era. And it just kind of became associated with the higher end amps having standby. It wasn't because standby was a luxury item. It was so they could handle the higher voltage in those amps to make a 50 to 100 watt amp, which was a new thing at the time, without spending the money for more expensive caps. And then Marshall copied the JTM45, copied the Bassman, the 58 through 60 Bassman to make the JTM45. So lo and behold, Marshalls have standby, even though the JTM45s and JTM50s don't really need them. The 87s, the 59s, the Bassman, the base models with solid state rectification, they began to need it because the B plus was extraordinarily high in a lot of those. And you needed to wait until the tubes are drawing current, or even series 500 volt caps could have a problem. I know that there's a bunch of stuff that I'm missing because I can't read while talking. So hello to everyone who's chimed in, and I will try to get to everything, but I am amazed to have this many people here on a Wednesday night. So I figured it'd be like 15 of us, and I could see one question, answer it, get to the next question, answer it. I'm beginning to see why the big channels have moderators. One last thought on standby, and then we'll get to other stuff. And I'm sorry that some of the questions are flying by. Maybe I'll have to do a follow-up video where I just go back and read all the chat comments and try to address some of the questions that I don't get to now, because they're flying by faster than I can see them. Standby implementation. If you do have standby, there are a lot of bad ways to do it. The AC Custom Classic, AC30 Custom Classic, did standby on the center tap of the HT supply, the HT secondary, before the rectifier tube. And that is really hard on rectifier tubes and kills them in that model, the Custom Classic AC30. So if you have that amp, don't use the standby. If you must put standby in an amp with a rectifier tube, put it after the first reservoir cap. Have your AC coming in to your rectifier tube, then going to the first reservoir cap, and that's where you put standby. And if you look at a Super Reverb, Fender shows you how. So what do we have here? What are my thoughts on Bob Gica? Man, people keep wanting to ask me that. I addressed that in the last live chat and on my Facebook page, Sonic Audio on Facebook, which is what I did before I moved everything to YouTube. Had a whole bunch, I still do have a whole bunch of videos up on Facebook. That's how it started. Facebook lost all my titles, so I can't go and sort through and say, here are all the Deluxe Reverb videos. They're still there, but there's some Gica. I don't know if the videos or some of the photo galleries. I started off doing photo galleries. Terrible amps, unsafe, unprofessional, should never have been sold to the public. I know that the guy thinks he's a genius, but it's just bad stuff. Find that stuff if you're interested. There was a question right above that. I can't see it now. Above the Gica question. Let's see if I can scroll up a little bit. The VHT Fryette amp. VHT and Fryette amps tend to be very, very good. I know that Stephen Fryette took exception with some things I said about reforming caps and called me out in one of his videos, but I think he misunderstood what I was saying. And I don't want to get into that because if we were in a room talking about it, I think we'd come out of the room friends and agreeing with each other. And I don't want to get into internet squabbles because it's a good way to get clickbaity, but it doesn't really change anyone's minds. But I have no complaints with Stephen's work. And, I welcome, if he wants to argue with me, have him call me. Other than that, peace out, Stephen. You do good amps, no problem. There was a question. Bad Cat Cougar 50. I'm not a big fan of Bad Cats. They do some crazy things. They take some Matchless's overbuilt stuff and take it to great extremes. I've not been impressed by the Bad Cats I've had in. Top Hats, however, those three brands kind of get lumped together: Bad Hat, Top Cat, and Matchless. Top Hat, to me, of the ones I've seen, have been the better amps. Thoughts on original Music Man amps? Oh, man, there are some really good sounding Music Mans like the HD 130s, but they are really loud and really clean. And I'm not sure that they are in the zeitgeist of what most guitarists are going for these days. They were designed at a time before advanced public address systems, and they're really loud. And I find them very hard on the attack, which can be great for some people. To me, I find them too aggressive and too clean. It just kind of makes you wince, or makes me wince to play one. It's kind of startling, and it's more than I would ever need. But if you get one and get it restored, it is a good amp and should be fixable. The main problem with them is that they use the same kind of tag board construction around the phase inverter and output and the filtering that Fender was doing at the time. And just like Fender, those tag boards warp and all the solder leads break and you got to reflow everything. Let's see. I got porn bots. Awesome. I got my very own porn bots. I would be glad to make you a mod, Brad. I don't know how to do it right now, but we'll talk about it for next time. Mainstream orange stuff. The tube stuff is good as long as you understand that you're getting something at a price point. And even like the Rocker Verb 50, I think that's what it's called, which is almost a $2,000 amp, if not a $2,000 amp. You're still getting something for the price point. They use not great pots. I'm really not a fan of their split shaft pot, 16 millimeter pots with pretty cheap metal and all the press-on knobs, and they don't always fit very well. But the amps themselves are built well as long as you understand what you're getting. They're not anything like the Orange's Mad amps that you'd find from the late 60s and 70s and stuff. But they're a good alternative to Fender, Vox, Marshall if you're looking for something slightly different. Any low wattage Marshall type amps for early at EVH with Variac? Ah, man. Yeah, call Dave Friedman, ask which one does that, and he will hook you up. I think most of his 20-watt amps are in the $1,500 range, and I'm sure he's got one that does the Brown thing. I will say, having had a lot of very nice amps and meeting a lot of very good players, that if I had the 68 Marshall and you took me to Sunset Sound and you had the mic on the amp with the Frankenstein guitar and the engineer and Ted Templeman and the same amount of coke on the faders and the same mastering engineer, but you had any player other than Edward, it would not have sounded like that. And I'm not saying just I couldn't sound like that. You get Pete Thorne, you get Phil X in there. They would all sound great, but they wouldn't sound like him. He had a really unique right hand. His tuning was very unique. The way he played was very unique. Have you ever tried to play that stuff with those little 60 millimeter picks he used? It's impossible. They're just flappy little things. And he had his pickups, real hot pickups, real low, and just total fluidity and just always in the pocket. Everything he did in his prime, and he had a bad period. Let's all be honest about that. But he had a huge prime and was getting back towards the end, it seems like. He had swing. And that is something you can't put into an app. So, but if you want an app that will do that, talk to Dave Friedman about his Runt series. He's got something in that line that'll do it. Let's see. Dumbo and Goop, they're not mysterious. Everything underneath the Goop is known. It just means that if you actually own a Dumbo and something under the Goop fails, someone like me, some poor schlub, has got to scrape off all the Goop to change out the part and say, oh, he used 120K instead of 100K. Ooh, whoop-de-doo. And then the very act of taking the Goop out, it's no longer an original Dumbo, and it's not worth $40,000, as if any amp should be worth $40,000. That is an insane game that I'm going to leave to the rock stars and the John Mayers of the world. Personally, I must have missed the day when we made John Mayer a rock star, but the world changes. Let's see. Any way to make a crate worth a damn? Some crates are actually pretty good. Some of the 90s stuff, St. Louis music, the VC series and the club series. Ah, man, I wish I could make the font bigger on this. If money, size, weight, etc., no issues for you, what 5 amps would I buy for myself? If I had to buy 5 amps, I'd want a really good example of an AC30. I'd want a really good example of a Tweed Deluxe 5A3. I'd want a Super reverb. I'd want a deluxe reverb. So is that 4? I'm at 4 now. And I'd probably, for my tastes and how I'd use it, and seeing what other tones I would already have, I'd probably look for like a 76, 75-ish Marshall 50 watt 1987 lead, where the volt, the B plus is in the 360 to 380 volt range. I think that's a really great sounding amp. How often do you have to rebias an amp? Depends. Man, yeah, the Tinder bots are here. Everyone be a grown up and just ignore the idiots. You shouldn't have to rebias an amp very often. If your amp needs to be rebiased and you've not changed tubes, your tubes are wearing out. So a fixed bias amp, when you change the tubes, needs to be biased for that set of tubes. And then if those tubes are no longer where they started off, I mean, and if it's drastic, that's a sign that it's time to change tubes. But typically, however long the power tubes last, that's the time between biases. I can't right click on your name. Well, let me get to the actual Mac instead of trying to do it on the iPad. Let's see here. Well, Brad, it's not letting me right click on your name on the Mac either, so I will make you an admin moderator on the next one. Is the noise floor on the 64 Handwire Deluxe high? Does my church have a bad amp? Could be a bad tube. They're not great great amps by any means. Certainly overpriced and over marketed, but they shouldn't be noisy. I don't have any experience with Red Bear amps or Garnet. Capacitors, electrolytic, and coupling. Your thoughts on brands and quality? That's a big. I'm just looking at this one thing real quick. That's a big subject, and it gets really subjective, and a lot of the things that are important people don't understand. Okay. Brad, you are now a moderator. Thank you. Kick the bots out for me. Thanks. I might do a separate video on what makes a capacitor a good choice or a poor choice in a circuit for whatever needs. But that's really a 40-minute discussion. I don't think it's good to insert that here. The casino, the Fuchs Casino is good. Can I swap in EL34Ls for EL34? They're the same tube, just need to be rebiased. Like anytime you change EL34s. Solid state or modeling amps that I like. You've got to scale your expectations. If I had an Axif X3 and a really good high fidelity set of speakers, as in basically a small PA and a very clean, loud power amp, you'd be hard pressed to tell that it's not tube. I could tell from the feel as a player, but as the listener, you'd be like, that sounds great. And then you get down to a Line 6 HX Stomp being played through the power amp return of some cheap amp that you picked up just for that purpose, it sounds good. It sounds okay. You get to the Fender Tone Masters, it may sound good to the audience, but man, in my experience, which is just for the deluxe reverb, it had just no headroom. It just hit the wall and did not feel right. The Katana feels pretty good for most of the sounds if you dial it in right. It's intentionally limited on its effects, but it's got like 3 or 4 pretty good sounding amp models in there. Eddie Van Halen would sound better through a Katana than I would through his amp, but he sounded best through his amps. You know, if you have to play a solid state or you want to play a solid state, find the one that works for you. And I don't care whether it's the Line 6, the Katana, some of the larger Roland Boss ones, or, you know, but you know, there are like 2 tiers of solid state modeling apps happening right now in terms of the stuff under $1,000, and then you get into the fractals and the Kempers and loading IRs and all that stuff. It's a very different price tier. You get a lot more for your money. I mean, you get a lot more options, a lot more value, but it's a higher cost of entry. And then there are still traditional solid state amps. I guess the question I get asked about a lot, I will go ahead and say avoid the hell out of them, are the JC120s, the JC60s, the JC77s, the Rolands. They were fantastic choices in 1978. They are not good choices now. They're expensive. They're hissy. They're noisy. They have no headroom. They're heavy. They're not going to have any resale value. And when they need work, because they're built like a pedal inside, they're expensive to repair. And they do one sound not that well. You get a Boss Katana, it will sound exactly like a JC120, weigh half as much, and give you about 50 other sounds and cost 1/3 as much. So, may not be a popular thing for me to say, but it's the truth. Take on the Mesa Boogie Trimoverb. Man, Trimoverb is one of the worst amps, and that's saying a lot. There are no Mesas I would recommend past the Mark II, and the Mark II is just a Fender with a weird overdrive channel added onto it. You know, it was played by some really great players, but they would have sounded just as good playing through a Fender concert. Let's see. I have a Hot Rod DeVille 2x12. Oh, redoing a Hot Rod series amp into a real amp is not worth it. The holes in the chassis that the tubes pass through are not the right size holes to put tube sockets in. The holes in the chassis for the pots are not the right size to put real pots in. I mean, that's easier to deal with the Unibit, but it's just not a good choice. I mean, a good chassis from Mojo Tone costs like $60. You want to build a Marshall? Build a Marshall. Want to build a Fender? Build a Fender. They sell cabs that fit them for $200 most of the time, $300. Better to start from scratch than to make something that was never intended to be a traditional tube amp. I'm kind of holding the guitar just because I'm used to holding a guitar in videos. It makes me feel more comfortable, and it covers my gut a little bit. Oh, it just scrolled to the bottom. All right. Have I ever worked on a Monoprice? No, I've not worked on a Monoprice anything, and I probably never will work on a Monoprice anything. I charge $80 an hour. I have a bench fee of $150. That covers the first 2 hours of labor. A Monoprice amp that costs $150 is not worth having me fix. It doesn't make any sense. And for those who think I'm being a snob, I have a very particular set of skills. I will find your Monoprice amp. I have unique skills, and my time is worth it, and I'm not going to waste it haggling with a Monoprice app. It's a very cheap thing. It is what it is. If my toaster dies, I don't take it to the toaster repairman. I go buy another $70 toaster. I mean, that's the reality of it. I mean, actually, I fix it, but I'm kind of weird. Are Tone King amps well built and reliable? I only have experience with the old Tone Kings, the ones that were made by what is his name? He's such a good builder. The stuff he's doing now is insanely cool. I can't remember his name, and I apologize to you if you see this, sir. Mark Bartel. Is it Mark Bartel? The stuff he's doing now is phenomenal. The stuff he used to make for Tone King was really good. I don't know. I've not had one of the Tone Kings in since it was sold to Boutique Audio Group. So I don't know if they're maintaining the quality or not. So I have no opinion on things I've not worked on. Why do I not like diodes in place of rectifier tubes and amps? I do like diodes in place of rectifier tubes and amps. On the Excalibur 15, I'm doing solid state rectification. I'm just going to be emulating some of the aspects of a tube rectifier in that. I think a tube rectifier made a lot of sense back when diodes and resistors of higher wattage were expensive, and tube rectifiers were used in everything. Today, when a tube rectifier is $30 and a diode is 4 cents, does a Marshall DSL count as solid state modeling? It's a tube amp. You take the tubes out, you don't get any signal. It has some solid state clipping stuff in it. It has some, solid state, digital reverb stuff. Still a tube amp. Whether it's the tube sound you like, I cannot say, but it does what it says on the tin. Thoughts on Splon amps? Have not worked on one. I have many friends who are techs who have good things to say about them. So, how tall am I? 6'7" in heels, 6'2" most of the time. Why with indicator light pulse with a tremolo in a Princeton type circuit? There's a tick. Well, the indicator light, if it's derived from the heaters, it should not be pulsing with a tremolo in a Princeton type circuit. But without your amp on my bench, I cannot speculate. I've not worked on a Lafayette, and I don't know if it actually is a Princeton type. 82 Princeton 2 on pure emotion. Did I do something dumb? It looks fancy a second side. Well, I don't know what you paid for it, so I don't know if it was dumb. They're not an app that I'm particularly fond of. The Deluxe 2, the Concert 2, the Princeton 2, all the 2s from the early 80s began to have some problems. As far as the weird desert years Fenders go, the Rivera amps are much better than the later ones by Zinke. I'll just say that. I don't get many Carvins in. As far as I don't know, when was the last time that Carvins were made? I remember they always had a little catalog in all the guitar magazines in the late 80s, and they were always just really cheap. There's a reason they cost less than a PV. When something costs less than anything else out there, especially in the 80s and 90s, there was a damn good reason for it. And I don't think that most of them have held up very well mechanically. They're not built well, in my experience. If there's been any made in the last 15, 20 years, I would avoid it because it's going to be a shadow of its former self, and its former self was never that great, unless you want to sound like Craig Chiquito. Does AC30CC1 have any substantial downsides compared to CC2 or C2? Well, the CC1 is a 1x12. The CC2 is a 2x12. But the CC versus the C, the custom classic versus the C, that's a big deal. The C is a better built amp as far as the PCBs goes. It's closer in most ways to the original circuit. though it does have some oddities where the solid state stuff isn't quite unity. Adds a little bit of gain there. The Custom Classic sounds good, but it's really voiced to be clean. R6 and R7 are 100K. They should be changed to 220K. And I don't remember the resistor number, but there's a 330K in series with the, this applies to both apps, the Custom and the Custom Classic. There's a 330K resistor in series with the normal volume pot on those apps on the normal channel. Jumper that resistor and that channel sounds a hell of a lot better on both amps. The Custom Classic came out at a bad time for Vox because they were moving, they were dealing with new EU regulations, and the old grill cloth was not fireproof, and they could not use the old grill cloth anymore. So they have a very synthetic looking grill cloth on the Custom Classic series. They found a better source for a better looking one that meets EU regulations. So the Custom has a better looking grill cloth. The Custom also has a much better looking red on the panel. The one on the Custom Classic went through various shades of pink and magenta tones. They never quite got the copper right. But if you have a Custom Classic, it can be a great amp. Needs a few tweaks. The main problem with the Custom Classics are twofold. They made a mistake, and the majority of the ones that left the factory, with C109 in the effects loop, where they put in a 0.22, like it said in the schematic, as opposed to the 2.2 that the designer, Steve, actually intended to be there. And the difference between a 2.2 microfarad and a 0.22 microfarad is a factor of 10. And you lose all your low end because of an RC filter that's developed right there. So if you change 109 back to the original 2.2 microfarad or higher, anything, 4.7, 10, doesn't matter. You're going to get all your low end back. The effects loop at that point is great as it was designed. The other issue is that a lot of them, the ones that didn't say X, so if you had an AC30 Custom Classic C2, it came with Wharfdales. The C2X came with blues. The blues sound phenomenal. The Wharfdales sound awful. So, when can I bring up a couple of amps? Bring them up to Mark Music, man. You're local. Have I ever been inside a 100-watt PRS Arcana? No, I've been in like the 2-channel C's and H's, and those are not great. They have fake Islet boards where it's PCBs with Islet-shaped traces, but it's not through-hole double-sided plated, and it's really not much on the copper. And the whole thing is just chock full of 914. I think it's what it is, 1 in 914 diodes instead of 4007s or 4004s or anything suitable. So the diodes fail. The board doesn't hold up to service. They don't sound that great. There's some weird voicing things in there. The Arcana I have no experience with. I was in one of the first ones they did, modeled after what Hendrix used at the Fillmore. I don't remember the model number, HGX Q LMNOP. That was a well-built amp inside, but it sounded like a Marshall. My Hot Rod DeVille ML has a clanky, tinny sound to it. The V-type speakers don't have a clanky, tinny sound to them, unless they're wired out of phase. I would have it say, take your amp to a tech. It's probably maybe a microphonic tube. What do you think of modding an amp to add switchable negative feedback? It's something that gets talked about in Premier Guitar articles a lot, and it gets talked about on various forums a lot because it's a pretty simple thing to do. It's really rarely that useful. You change the gain response to the output section, but it also changes the feel and the overall frequency response quite a bit. There are other things you can do. You can play around with partial tone stack lifts, get the same kind of effect, but it's not as problematic. I would say rather than deal with switchable negative feedback, most amps, if you want to play around with that kind of thing, especially for hard rock, aggressive, overdriven amps, it'd be better to play around with resonance, adding a resonance circuit, which is just a one meg pot and a suitable resistor most of the time, which would be a lot better, more useful than just variable negative feedback. If you do play around with the variable negative feedback, remember that if you go to one extreme, you're going to have no negative feedback. If you go to the other extreme, you're going to have all the negative feedback, and that can cause terrible, terrible sounds. So as you decrease negative feedback in an amp, listen very carefully. As soon as you begin to hear something weird begin to happen, don't keep going to see what that weird thing is, because that's when it starts to oscillate and things can motorboat. So find what your minimum is. I got a Crate TV 620 that lost. Oh my God. Turn off the caps, dude. I don't know if that's even a question. It's all in caps, but I don't know if it's a question. Good text in Tampa, Orlando. I don't know. Thoughts on third power amps? I don't know. I've been curious about them, but I've never had one come in. So, how long does it generally take to deal with a Fender Islet board to get rid of conductivity? Depends. That's a really good question. It depends on if it's before 1973 or not. Before 1973, maybe 2 hours. After 73, they did the heavy waxing, 4 hours. You got to really want the amp to be good, but it's really worthwhile. Because on the non-wax stuff, I can just pretty much soak everything with isopropyl, give it a real good scrub, and it all evaporates, and it's good to go. On the after 73s, I've got to remove an awful lot of wax because the wax itself is the problem. Our current production Supra is well built and reliable? No. The Delta King and the Blues King are okay-ish. They're okay. They sound okay. They're built okay. You get what you ask for. All the other Supras I've had to come in have been total nightmares with components that get hot, practically wrapped up in wires that melt. Those components get hot, they get really hot, and they burn the board. They have like 20-watt resistors nestled up against a PCB. Not only does the PCB burn, it chars the ceramic tube sockets. They burn, and that takes a lot to char a ceramic socket. And the ceramic sockets in those things are garbage, and they break, and they develop problems. The last one that came in, the fix was to scrape away about 4 inches of the board, rewire a bunch of stuff, and run some chassis mount resistors to make it safe to use. But they're terrible designs. They're trading on the fact that Jimmy Page used a Supra for some stuff, and so people now think Supra is fantastic. Well, if you agree that Supra gives you the Jimmy Page sound, contact my buddy Mitch Colby. Get yourself a Sun Dragon and have the real deal. But the stuff that's sold under the Supra brand today, no. Is my jacket and black T-shirt going to be my signature look? The jacket's because it's like 50 degrees outside and it's a little bit cold in the house. I'm turning on the heat as long as possible. And the black T-shirt is because I mostly wear black T-shirts during the day. I was working in here in my space all day, and with soldering, always little drips and drabs of solder and splatter and stuff. The black T-shirt doesn't show the problems as much, and I buy them like 10 at a time because I know they're all going to get little burn holes in them. When will you see me on Tone Talk? Friday, November 4th. I sent the thumbnail off to Mark today, so that should be coming up pretty soon. The Vox Night Train G2. I'm not sure about the G2, but the Vox Night Trains are pretty much garbage. Avoid. Danger, Will Robinson. Set up a tip jar. I don't want to get into that. I don't know. I'll think about it. The whole tip jar thing, the whole Patreon thing kind of weirds me out. I already charge a good amount per hour, and I'm constantly working. I have work. I've got this channel, which has given me more work than I could accept for the next 3 years already. So as far as advertising goes, the channel's paying off, and I enjoy doing this kind of thing. Having a conversation with other musicians and guitarists, and trying to inject a little bit of my experience onto the world. Yeah, I don't pretend to be the only guy who knows what he's talking about. I'm not the source, nor do I want to pretend to be. But I'm glad to share the things that I do know. So this is kind of cool. I don't know. I might do like T-shirts or hats or coffee cups or something. But the traces suck in PRS amps. Yes, Matt. Yes, they do. Kevin K. You like me even more now that you can see me. I wonder what people thought I looked like. That's always a weird thing. I had this, I used to listen to Prairie Home Companion every Saturday when I was a kid, and I had this image of what Garrison Keeler would look like. And then I saw him, and I could not match that face to that voice for years. It was so strange. My take on Little Walter amps. No one's going to like this. Little Walters are not very good, not very well built Fender Tweed clones with some crazy capacitors added to suck all the highs off so that harmonica guys don't feedback as much. I was very unimpressed with them. And right above that was thoughts on Dr. Z amps. I've got quite a few videos up on Dr. Z's, and I discussed them in the last live stream the other day. They're well built. They're overbuilt. I don't think that they are. I would avoid the reverb models. If you get a reverb model, make sure it's not a head version, because the ones in the heads, the tanks are too close to transformers. So if you must have a Dr. Z reverb, make sure it's the Mark II if it's the Maz. You don't want the Mark I with the reverb. Make sure it's the combo so the tank is far enough away that it doesn't buzz. And make sure all your hardware is tight, because they don't use locking nuts, tooth washers, and that stuff comes loose. And when it needs service, changing a resistor takes 20 minutes where it should take 2 minutes, because they wrap the lead multiple times. There's mil spec, and there's what they do. Mil spec is 270 degree, not even a full wrap. They do like 3 or 4 wraps, and they're all together, and it's really makes it difficult to change one thing. How do I test for bad transformers? It really depends on what the transformer fault is. The most recent bad transformers I had a bad power transformer in something I don't recall which right now. But when I disconnected all the secondaries, it was still drawing infinite current through my current limiter, which meant that only the primaries were connected. So that told me, hey, nothing's connected to this on the secondary. Nothing's causing this to blow. It's bad. So that was how I found out that power transformer was bad. Other power transformers that were bad, I'd be like, oh, everything's working except the heater's only giving me 2.8 volts. One side of the heater has burned. Stuff like that. The 5150 last week, with a bad output transformer was kind of unusual. Had really low distorted output, and I thought the cause initially was a burnt screen grid resistor, and that screen grid resistor was burned. It measured open, so I thought that was the cause of that. I changed the screen grid resistor, which involved removing the whole board to access them. Put it back together, have voltage in all 4 screens, low distorted output. Okay, let me find out if it's the output jack or the output transformer. Tempt in an output jack, a different output jack, just in case there was a problem with the stock ones. Still had low distorted output. Tempt in a 50 watt, was it 50 watt Marshall or an AC30? Anyway, I had a 50 watt Marshall output transformer I have here, and I connected that to the same tempt in output jack that I've been using. Had perfect sound. I'm like, okay, bad output transformer. I put in the most correct output transformer I could get for the guy, which was a Hammond made for a twin reverb, which is fine for a 5150. Put it in there, had low distorted output, put in my test speaker jack again, full thing came back, had a bad screen grid resistor, bad output transformer, and faulty output jacks, all three of which individually gave low distorted output. All three had to be changed to get the full output, and that was a nightmare. Thoughts on the Yamaha G100? I do not have any thoughts on them, and not heard one or seen one. Ken and Sydney, hello, Ken. Good morning. '70s hand-wired chap. What would I do? Preventative maintenance. I would take it to a tech, and I am booked for the next couple of months, I think. Yeah, Supra Comet smoked and Blitz power tube. No surprise there. Man, Brad, you're really being a champion there. I thought it was just the word you used, but hey, you're on this. I appreciate it. What do I think of the Friedman Dirty Shirley Mini? I've not played one. I assume that it's built similarly to the Runt 20. I'm sure it's very good. And Engel amps, I have not had an Engel in. People ask about Engel amps a lot in a lot of my videos. And in Memphis, I'm just not seeing players get them. I don't know that there are any dealers for Engel here. I think it's a much more popular brand in Europe than it is, at least in this part of America. So I just don't see that many. Let's see. Same thing with new Magnetone amps, trading on a name. Well, the Magnetones to a degree are trading on a name, but they're much better built than the Supras. I've had a few different models in. Some are very good. I had one that came in, the Super 15. I had a bum solder connection. That was an easy fix. I had two for the guy who's playing with Elvis Costello, Varsity 15s, and they had biased them like they were matchlesses, and his tubes were dying. So I biased them like they were Voxes, and they were very happy. Jesse Hydro, how about my pedals? Any chance they'll ever be available? If they are, it'll be because I've found someone who wants to license them. The Tailless, let me grab a Tailless board for you guys, because I've got some boards here. If I can remember where I put them. Here they are. All right. Most of the time when you open up a pedal, inside is like a little postage stamp worth of stuff. And there's a lot of empty real estate in there, just a little bitty circuit. This is what's inside the Tailless. So let me turn it this way. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 individual little switches. This has got some dust on it. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Some combination of opto isolators and two little trim pots, trim pot here, trim pot here. I've got some very expensive analog devices, op amps, all running at plus minus 15 volts. And here's a voltage doubler that gives me that. And it's not actually a voltage doubler, it's a fancier kind of pump. So I take the 9-volt DC and I regulate that to 5 volts DC, and that turns into plus minus 15 through this wonderful device. And then all of the op amps, which have little bitty snubber caps right on their rails, right at the op amp. Everything is socketed. And aside from these electrolytics over here that are just for the power supply and the switching, the audio never goes through an electrolytic cap, always goes through these WEMA box caps. Sometimes I have to use 2 in parallel to get the value I need. And every square millimeter of this thing is used, and it was designed down to the T And to build a Tailless takes me about 5 hours. And I wasn't selling them for enough, even though they were relatively expensive. They're going for crazy amounts now on eBay and stuff. So I was losing money on these. And then I could not get the custom enclosures made anymore. So unless I wanted to order 10,000, and I didn't have the money to do that. And I wasn't making any money on these because I was making something too good for the market. That's just the honesty. I was being a pie in the sky designer, and I was not being a businessman. And my business suffered, even though I had a wonderful thing. If someone were to license this, 90% of this could be done SMD or done with pick and place through hole, as long as the new company would agree to certain stipulations of mine, like the audio shall pass only through WEMA or other suitable film caps, so that the end result is the same. This could be the cost could be cut to a third of what this cost me to make, and the time to make it would go way down. But unless someone really wants to license this design from me and do it right, it's probably just not going to happen. I honestly make more money working on amps, so that's the hard reality of life. Turret versus Islet. No real big difference. Depends on how many components you need to connect together. You can get more components in around a turret than you can through most Islets, unless you do really large Islets. And the other thing is, Islet boards, you've got to have a backing board to handle any drips or stuff. And turrets, everything pretty much stays up top where you want it to be. So when I prototype, I tend to do turret because it's easier to keep it neat, but there's no electronic advantage or disadvantage of one versus the other. Whole bunch of just plain shit amps out there now. Yeah, there are, Matt. When I mention one I get called all kinds of snob. Best power conditioner for the money. See, that's the trick. For the money, a good power conditioner is like $2,000 to $4,000. Yeah, if you go look at what AC/DC or David Gilmour have in their rig, that's the money they're spending. Below that, below 1,500, you're not really getting much. You get some line filtering and maybe some extra fusing. Way too much is made of power conditioners. No, the Mark I is not my favorite producer, man. Mark I has got a weird bad master volume in it. The Mark II, I think, is probably the best amp Mason has made. The Mark II and the Satellite 60, which is, I think, a Mark III with 90% of the amp left out, and you're left with actually something that sounds pretty good. But you still have to replace all the crappy 400-volt caps and deal with tiny pads and traces run too close together, and carbon cops that burn, and all kinds of stupid Mesa things. I don't have any thoughts on all in Japan apps. I've never had one come in. 65 reissue deluxe versus Rivera concert or champ. Oh, the modern reissue versus the others. I can make a 65 reissue pretty much bulletproof for $250, $300 to make the old Rivera concert and stuff even sound good, let alone be reliable, is $400 plus. I don't know if the 20 or the 5 are comparable to the 40. I've not had the 20 or the 5M. So I've worked on one train wreck, and I've worked on many clones, and I've worked on some Fenders. I was following Ken in those Fenders. Ken did very good work. The train wreck and the Dumbo, or at least the Overdrive Special, the earlier version of it, I'm pretty sure both just came out of them looking at a AB165 basement and saying, "Oh, we got an extra gain stage here. What can we do with that?" And just taking it and saying, "What if it, instead of just being an afterthought that there's all this gain available, we actually sculpt the tone for that?" And it's a real train wreck is hard to control as a player. A lot of them don't have any grid stoppers on the input, and so you get a real responsive front end, but it can get away from you. I've never worked on a Marsh. I don't know who makes the best Tweed Deluxe app these days. I have not seen an email about an SVT2 Pro. Sorry, I'm still playing catch up on emails. I get more than one man can keep up with, for which I'm grateful and apologetic and embarrassed at the same time. But it's just so much. If this channel gets to have many more subscribers, I'm gonna have to hire someone to manage the day-to-day little things like that. And the trouble with replying to emails is half of them I'm the only person who can provide an answer. But if I could just have someone just go through and weed out all the spam and obvious kooks, that would save me a lot of time. Anyway, it's a good problem to have, I guess, but it is a problem. All right, I'm trying to catch up to where the chat is now. I'm the James Earl Jones of amp techs in both voice and appearance. Well, I think that I am relatively svelte in comparison to James Earl Jones, but I will say that at times with my children, when they were very young, I would be their father. Selling boards of the Tailless? No. Anything with my name on it, I have to have control over. Old high watts are works of art inside. They are works of art with bad ground schemes, but I have been able to fix the ground scheme in many of them and retain the artwork. And in fact, I've had some where I was following why is my brain forgetting his name? The wonderful guy at High Watt who signed the things. He was the guy who did the work, and it was all RAF level harnesses, and I had to redo all that stuff, and it's really difficult. But I was able to rebuild it all so it looked like no one would ever know that anyone had been in there. But the ground was mysteriously fixed, and the hum went away. Weber attenuator is not working 100%. Then it'd be serviced. Oh, I would never buy a Weber attenuator. They're poorly built, in my experience, and that's a lot to trust your amp to. I know that's not a popular thing to say. Is a Vox AC4 HW worth keeping? If it's not working, no. If it's working, why not? They're not very good apps. When I designed the Excalibur 15, did I approach the design from the speaker back to the input or divide a specific subsection first? That's a hard way to, that's a weird, not weird, but it's not the way I approached it. I looked at it as what do I like about old Voxes and what don't I like about the old Voxes and what things could I combine. I had just finished a 62 AC15 restoration, and both channels sounded awesome. But there's just an awful lot of circuitry in that amp to give the tremolo, and there are various effects now which do very good tremolo. But it's like that EF86 channel is awesome, but its brilliant setting is crazy. It shuts off almost all the low end. How to make that more useful? Well, how to replicate the actual sound of this. You can't just follow the schematic because the voltages you get if you just build the schematic with a different transformer are not the voltages and ratios you're going to get in the original. And I had all my notes. So the Excalibur is chasing that specific sound with more flexibility. But it is achieving it in a different way because I have different voltages coming in to start with, and then I'm blending and mixing other channels. So more on that to come. So I was kind of a holistic approach, but I've worked on a lot of Voxes. I know what's great about them. I know what's overblown about them. So I don't know anyone around Portland. I don't think. I know my buddy Rick around Seattle, but I think Seattle and Portland are pretty far from each other. I would enjoy ham radio. I don't even enjoy ham salad. I don't have any interest in. I mean, I already do tube amps. I have enough arcane knowledge. I don't need to get into ham radio and talk to my father-in-law and his buddies. I wish I hadn't said that. That came across mean. I didn't mean that, but it's just I think it's a generational divide there. If I build new to one of the old Tweed schematics with all new parts, will it sound like the original would have? Well, because new parts lack mojo. New parts don't lack mojo, but unless you have Schumacher iron, you're going to get a different sound. Unless you are saying, well, the old iron is giving me a heater voltage of 6.7 on the heaters with 120 volts mains, and my new iron is giving me 6.24. Well, the 6.24 is correct, but the old iron would be running hot. It's a lot of things. It is possible to make a brand new version of an old amp and have it sound exactly like an example of the original. Not all examples of the original sound like each other. You have to scale back your expectations a little bit and say, would a player who loves playing through his 66 Deluxe Reverb enjoy playing through this very modern variation? Yeah, James Earl Jones was quite svelte back in the day, back when he was doing his boxing movies. I'm somewhere between that and Coming to America guy. '90s Vibra Verb reissues. I have not had any of the Vibra Verb reissues. I don't think. What am I thinking of? There was one that they did that was a Vibra Verb sold with 2x12s and called something else. I can't remember. They're all right. They're not really the thing. Actually sounds just like AVE in pitch, ADSR, and cadence. Who's AVE? A good video would be to talk through certain popular attenuator load box choices. I would have to have a whole bunch of them and do a bunch of testing on all of them, and I don't have the money to buy them, and I don't think that many manufacturers are going to want to send them to me in case I'm mean. What's my favorite music group to listen to while working? Man, I've got so many favorite bands. Have you ever heard of the Beatles? You ever heard of Led Zeppelin? I don't need to tell you guys about the outlier, everyone, how original. So let me mention some things that may not be as well known. Fountains of Wayne is a favorite, especially Welcome Reel's Interstate Managers. People know them from Stacy's Mom, but every song on that album is just a gem. I love the Grays, which were kind of what happened when some of the guys left Jellyfish before they started playing with Beck and everyone else. Always Big Star. Really enjoy Wilco for the most part. I'm trying to think if there's anyone. Beth Orton should be a star. I love Elastica. No, it's too much stuff. I don't enjoy the Grateful Dead. I really don't enjoy the Grateful Dead. I can't do that. Sorry. Thanks, Kevin K. If someone makes me listen to Grateful Dead, you know that I'm handcuffed. All right, B-side, I will. Favorite Rush album. All right, now we're talking my language. It varies depending on mood and time. I probably spent the most time with moving pictures. But right now, if I put one on, it's probably going to be Hemispheres or A Farewell to Kings. So something about how everything was coming together on those two albums. And it was still just three guys. They didn't have an army of Gettys singing backup yet. They were still borrowing guitars to do overdubs in the studio. So, something about that era. But they had the sense, they had the chorus, they had the delay. It was all coming together, but they weren't singing about Dungeons and Dragons anymore. Favorite one knob amp? Don't have one. I'm a Zappa fan, but I can't do every period of Zappa. Never heard Macbeth. I don't have a favorite amp tech in LA. I love Husker Du. Husker Du, Husker Du, Husker Du. If you don't know Husker Du, if you like the Pixies, if you like Nirvana, you love Husker Du already, and you just don't know it. Because they did. Shepherd's Touch. I think this is the second time you've asked me this. What would I do for preventing maintenance to keep it operating? I would take it to a tech, and as I said before, and I don't mean to be rude, unless you live in Memphis, I'm just not accepting anything from outside right now. I'm playing catch up. I don't want to have you send a champ to me and have it sit here for 9 months. So Mallory 150 is suitable for guitar tone caps. Any capacitor is suitable for a guitar tone cap, though. You don't want to put a 600-volt electrolytic in; it won't fit under the pick guard. Most guitars that I work on, unless there's a structural need to use an axial cap, I'll use a little 50-volt Panasonic. The material does not matter; the voltage does not matter. I might go to from a 50-volt to 100-volt if I need to have a thicker lead. On some stuff, if the capacitor is spanning a distance, I might use a 200-volt cap to have it yet even thicker lead. But that's about a mechanical connection that's reliable. People ascribe magical qualities to tone caps and guitars, and it's the simplest high-pass circuit in the world, and paper and oil won't buy you anything. People don't understand how the circuit works. People are glad to sell you all kinds of stuff that'll get you laid, and people are glad to spend the money on anything that'll keep them from spending time with the practice with the metronome. But tone cap is nonsense. What do I think of Greg Koch? I hate Greg Koch because every time I watch his videos, I want to break all my guitars and go into real estate or something, because he's insanely funny. He's insanely smart. And he plays guitar like nobody's business. And he has fun while doing it. He'll play something that just makes me want to slip my wrists, and it makes him giggle to do it. And I love and hate him, because how can you get mad at someone who enjoys doing something so wonderfully? But damn, do you have to be so good? Greg, if you see this, slow it down a little bit for the rest of us, okay? Just dial back the grizzle. Peter Gabriel era Genesis, any era of Peter Gabriel. Peter Gabriel I love Peter Gabriel. Man, if you love Peter Gabriel, if you don't have it, find the Robbie Robertson eponymous EP. Eponymous means not EP record. Eponymous means that the name of the record is Robbie Robertson by Robbie Robertson. He used to be the singer and guitarist of the band, one of the singers in the band. But Daniel Lanois produced this record in 1987, and he had I believe he had just finished So with Peter Gabriel and his band, with Tony Levin and Manu Katché and those guys. And he was just starting or had started pre-production on Joshua Tree with U2. And so you have members of Peter Gabriel's band, members of U2 when they were really on fire and being very creative, combining, working with Robbie Robertson, and the Bodines are on there, and Maria McKee's on there, and Daniel Lanois does a phenomenal production, and it is just a beautiful symphonic. It's not symphonic. It is. It's like in Panavision. It's just this huge soundscape, and all the sounds, all the playing. I mean, if you get Manu Katché and Tony Levin, you're halfway there. Fantastic album. Look for that. Big Wreck are scary. Oh yeah, I gotta go with Belly Button, the first album. I will say this about Jellyfish: if they hadn't done the cartoon stuff, they would have been a mega band. They really did dress like escapees from Saturday morning cartoons, and something about it's a little coy to me. It sometimes comes across as, aren't we being clever? And I can find that a little bit off-putting. Other times it's just brilliant, but musically it's always there. But yeah, some of those guys went on to do the Grays, which I absolutely love. Jason, can't remember his name, the guitarist from Jellyfish. Jason went on to do the Grays and Very Best Years. Phenomenal music. Best title track from an eponymous album. Dude, 2112. Sleeper Apps. Trainer, YBA1. And our Soldano is really well made. Our Rivera App's good quality. Rivera is a good quality. Jason Faulkner, yes. Trainer, YBA1s are very, very good quality. Covered that pretty extensively in the Apps Under $1,000 video. Stuff that flies under the radar, aside from things like Trainer, or if you're going for a certain Fender-ish clean 60s sound with reverb, be aware that Ampeg also had some really good amps, as you've seen on the channel. I don't find that there are an awful lot of sleeper amps out there, mainly because if an amp is really good, it sells and people buy it. If you look at all the amps that were being made in the 50s, and then you look at a Fender, a betting man in 1954 would have said, this is the company that's going to make it. They sounded better. They're easier to service. They were built well, and they sounded better to musicians because Leo did not play guitar. Leo was not particularly musical, but he loved listening to Western swing, and he had his players in the Southern California area all the way through Oklahoma that he trusted, and he made sure that the amps pleased them. And he surrounded himself with guys who did play, who were more musical, but he listened to them. But he also really built things to be roadworthy, to be serviceable, and to give a very good sound at a very good price. They were expensive amps, but they lasted and they were built well. People are like, man, I don't want to pay $1,200 for a deluxe reverb, but amps are overpriced. If you go back to 1964 to look at the price of a deluxe reverb and then adjust for inflation, that was like $2,800, $3,000 amp. Twin reverb is closer to $4,000. really well-built amps that are still with us 60 years later for the most part because they're built well and designed to be serviced. As I talked about earlier, Drew Leclerc, the YGM3, I've been told by some techs I trust that the earlier production YGM3s were great. Maybe the ones I had were later in the run. The ones I had were pretty much garbage. And I'm sorry about that. It is not a members only jacket. It's a Levi Strauss trucker's jacket. I think I got it for $75. Hey, Tony Stidler Dennison. At the beginning of the chat, I discussed orange tube amps, and I'm sorry to just refer you to that if you have time to watch it later. Bill M Mod's still a good way to upgrade a Blues Junior. I don't think they ever have been. Both the Fromel and the Bill M, I think the Bill M mods were well intentioned, but there's just a lot of misinformation, and most people trying to do those mods end up doing more damage than good. As I said in the video on the Blues Junior yesterday or the day before, when you have a 7.5 or 10 millimeter lead spacing on the board, and you try to cram an orange drop with a 15 or 20 millimeter lead spacing in there, and the lead on the original was 0.06 millimeters in diameter, and you're putting one that's 0.09 millimeters in diameter through that same hole, you end up damaging the pads, you damage the trace, you have no mechanical support on your component, the leads are all bent over in weird ways. It's just not done well. What's my home or stage amp? I don't actually own an amp right now. I don't have any need to. I don't play out. And if I want to play an amp, I'm not exactly starved for choices right now. I've got an AC30 there, an AC30 there. You can see I've got quite a few here, most of which are in various stages of playability. I've got a Pro Reverb, a Twin Reverb, Magnetone there. I've got 3 Blues Juniors out there that are ready to go back. I thought about putting either the Excalibur or that matchless Spitfire here to noodle through for this, but I figured it'd just be too loud. If I wanted a practice amp, I would probably get a Deluxe Reverb AC50 custom or a Princeton Reverb and just keep the volume down or the master down here. And then I'd be loud enough to play on a stage with a drummer if I needed it to. Reverb squeals if you turn up the Princeton Reverb. Any ideas what you need to try to fix it? Man, that's I cannot get into what if too much here, but there are 2 things you need to think about. Number one, on a Princeton Reverb, there's the filter cap that's reverb recovery stage uses, and there's a filter cap that the reverb driver uses. And if one of those is bad, you can have a problem show up in the reverb that did not show up in the rest of the circuit. You could also have oscillation, or you could have something positioned too close. Man, if you were here with the amp, we could probably knock it out in 15 minutes, but I just can't do the long distance. Reverb way too noisy with the first gen Blues Junior, worth fixing. It's a cheap fix if you bring it to a tech, but I mean, it shouldn't be noisy on the reverb. It might be a bad cable, might be a bad tank, might be a bad op amp, but I can't speculate without having your amp here. Am I a coffee brewer or a Keurig fan? I am not a Keurig fan. This was a bone of contention with my wife and myself when we first met. She was using a Keurig, and she was always telling me that I need to recycle more. But she was using the damn Keurigs with every morning to be another little plastic cup. I said, this makes no sense. Look at this versus a coffee filter. A. B. The Keurigs, every Keurig I tried, the coffee sucks. It just doesn't taste good. So now we have a Braun Drip Master 5,000 or something, and it works really well. And I have it set to high temperature bold, and it has gold micro mesh, so there's no filters at all. I just rinse it out. And I don't actually own the Excalibur. Belongs to my friend Hal, and it's here both because I've been doing his pedal board, and he wanted to, and doing some his Epiphones, and he wanted to know what it sounded like through that. And he's also let me keep it here for another week, so it can be a backdrop when I'm on Tone Talk. But pour over French press, the way to go. I don't like the grind, getting the grounds in the cup. I've had that too much. Espresso is garbage. Espresso is for people who don't like coffee. Little bitty espresso. You drink it and you go. I like to sit down and enjoy a cup of Joe, and it's a process of savoring. So this is not coffee. I don't want this little bitty thing, the little demi-tasse, and you stand at the counter and you drink it and you go. I like coffee, good, strong coffee, and you take your time with it. What kind of car do I drive? I drive a Volkswagen Golf TDI. I believe that's the one. The turbo, not the diesel. And I do not do my own maintenance other than I change a tire or something, because I don't have the computer equipment to interface with the Volkswagen. What are the whole low-hanging fruit in a hot rod if I were to redesign it? Mostly what I showed you before, and I would make the overdrive channel sound good. Espresso is not just shots, but all the macchiatos and cappuccinos and stuff, that just gets more and more into desserts. Espresso has nasty flavor. I like coffee flavored coffee. Yeah, I agree with Dennis Lear on that. Let me get something to add here at this point before we lose everyone on the espresso thing. So I do want to revisit the espresso thing. In the summer of 2019, we were in Lisbon, and then we were in Florence, and I could not get any coffee to save my life. And everything was espresso, macchiato, espresso, latte, cappuccino, all the variations. And in each country, in Portugal and in Italy, like on the last day of each trip, I eventually found something which was passable as an enjoyable coffee experience. And no, it was not an Americano. But once I finally found the thing, every coffee shop, every cafe called it something else. So it's useless information. And so as soon as I got back to America, actually, as soon as I got back to New York, I had as much coffee as possible. Not Starbucks. Starbucks is wretched, burnt tasting nastiness. But anyway, so this is an Excalibur 15 in progress. And this is the one where I started to build this one, and I couldn't get faceplates for it. So I'm hoping to resume soon. It's lovely, and I just look at it and it mocks me because it wants to be finished. But there are things these are the holes in the chassis that Mojo Tone provides, and some of the holes I'm using, and some things they go in different locations, and so I can't place the pots and switches and stuff until I have the faceplates, because I use the faceplate also as a template to know where to drill the new holes. So I'm in a frustrated, arrested development state, all thanks to COVID and the downturn of business associated with it. spring and summer of 2020. Starbucks is garbage. The DeVille ML good reliable amp compared to Hot Rod HRD, they're the same amp. The preamp's different. Everything else about them is the same. The Landau DeVille is going to be the same as far as reliability as any DeVille. The main difference between the DeVille and the Deluxe, there are three in my experience. The DeVille has a different voltage on the secondary tap used for the low voltage supply, so it doesn't have to drop the voltage as much. So those 5-watt resistors don't burn the board as badly, and the Zeners don't burn the board as badly. The Hot Rod, for whatever reason, they expect a higher voltage than they needed on the secondary, and they drop it more, and it turns into heat. Second of all, I think that the Hot Rod sounds better than the Blues. The 4x10 version probably sounds the best as far as the speakers go, but it's way too heavy for most people to pick up. I'm a big guy, and it's heavy. It's a heavy, bulky thing, and it's not really built that well to handle that much weight in my experience. Have I ever considered writing a book? Yeah, absolutely. I should be a writer, but it would not be about amps. So if I ever get around to finishing my novel, I'll let you guys know. I don't want to do the super chats because then I'm like, all right, your question gets answered because you bribed me, and your question doesn't until, it's a lovely question, and I'm not going to answer it unless you give me a buck. Screw that. I'll make money other ways. Most newer amps are using lead-free solder because you cannot sell an amp without lead-free solder through official channels, at least in Europe. I think California, some countries in Asia. I don't know about Australia yet. And the EU also has a regulation that every secondary on a power transformer must be fused, which I think that part is insane because it's really not necessary. And it's just going to give the musician a lot of false failures. It's really hard to find a heater fuse that won't trip for non-failure modes. And if you do everything else right in the amp, you can prevent a heater secondary short without going to a fuse. So there are a lot of problems getting things sold in Europe. I understand the ROHS. I'm all for it in most industries. There's absolutely no reason that this remote control for my light here, it's not on right now. I could do it. Eventually, this remote control will die because it's a piece of garbage. So I'm glad that this thing doesn't have any lead in it. And when it dies, it'll go into landfill. And I'm sorry that it has all that plastic. I don't have any control over that. But at least it doesn't have any lead. And hopefully it doesn't have any mercury. But I've got 76 Pro Reverb right there to my left, and it's all leaded, and everything in there is fixable. And that amp, there's no reason for that amp ever to go into landfill. So I think, and a lot of the amps today that are made with non-leaded solder will fail because non-leaded solder is really bad for this particular purpose. And so it's like guaranteeing that these amps will end up in landfill as opposed to just being used for a couple generations. So it's a problem, but as far as I know, Brussels is not asking my opinion. Favorite current production 5E3 build? I don't have experience with Clark Beaufort. Victoria is quite good. Lazy J, based on my experience, I would just say avoid them if you want your amp to work. That's going to get me some haters, but if you go to my Facebook page, you'll see some Lazy J's that I had to fix that were. Man, I don't want to be loud shits on amps. That's not what the purpose of this channel is. I don't want to lie if someone says, what do you think about this? So if you want to know about my experience with Lazy J, Go find them on my Facebook page. They're up there. I don't want to start a YouTube war with any particular company, and I don't want to be the guy that shits on individual companies. I think people make way too much of that or focus way too much on that. It's it's one of the. I'm trying to learn how to be more balanced in my presentation, but at the same time, I'm a call turd a turd. Is there any way to upgrade the pots in your AC4? No. Just don't waste any money on AC4 reissues. Why is it fixed? I don't know about the 2555X versus the other one. I offered mods for the AC15C1, but I'm not doing them right now. Hey, Billy. Yeah, Brad, you shit on the apps. I'll use the toilet. Here's a good one for the class. I just bought a 1985 JCM 800 2203, and the low gain input is vastly quieter, like 1/10. Than the high gain input. Many 2203 owners have told me this shouldn't be the case. What should I look at? Well, then many 2203 owners have told you incorrect information. You have an additional gains stage if you're going to high gain versus low gain. And there's an awful lot of attenuation that you are getting on the low gain. So if I have a JCM 800 2203 here and I want to have a gig level clean sound, I have the master volume up at 3 o'clock or higher, and I've got to have the channel volume at 1 o'clock or higher to get even a passably loud sound. If I were to go to the high gain channel with those same settings with, say 2 o'clock on the preamp and 3 o'clock on the master, I would go deaf. It's got like 100 times more gain. So whoever told you that is wrong. There are ways to increase the amount of gain on the clean channel, but it's not something that I would give out over the internet because it's very complicated to explain how it works, and a good tech would not need my instructions on how to do that. But yeah, the clean on the 2203 is kind of an afterthought, and any tech who's got experience in Marshalls will know what I'm talking about. Best stuff to replace the foam inside the doghouse cover on my 64 Super Reverb. Yeah, go to Lowe's or Home Depot or wherever and get the foam tape sold for window insulation. 3/4 by 3/4 ought to do it. It's got adhesive on one side. You cut it to length, you stick it in there. It's pretty much what Fender used, and it won't deteriorate for a decade or two. For the boutique high gain amps out there, what would I be going for as far as build quality goes? Man, that's tough because there are a lot of really good choices above a certain price point. And I would be hard pressed to say, Sir VHT, Friedman, one's better than the next. I am friends with John Sir. I'm friendly with Dave Friedman. I have nothing but respect for some of the other guys doing this. I would have to play them and see which one felt and sounded right to me. And, the previous live chat last week, someone was asking me about Soldano versus Friedman. They're both really well-made amps. They both do great sounds, but they do different sounds. And I cannot tell you which is better. I can tell you at that price point, play them. One will speak to you. Colder bias makes tremolo sound better. Yeah, on the cathode bias tremolos, many Fenders and that use cathode bias trims and and the Princeton stuff. The cooler you can keep the bias, the less thud you'll get, and the smoother the tremolo will be. A signature leaded solder. Well, it'd be cheaper to change my last name to Custer. Custom Vibrasonic is a reliable amp. I don't know that I have any experience with the custom Vibrasonic. Isn't the Vibrasonic just a twin reverb with a 15-inch speaker? I have a 97 Fender twin reverb, has power, no sound. Well, that could be a lot of things. And that's not the kind of app question I'm here to answer. I don't have a magic crystal ball, but any reputable tech can fix your twin. What's the ohms of extension speaker jack on the 66 Super Reverb? A 66 Super Reverb, you're asking the age-old question. Basically, did Leo make a mistake? Because he has 4 speakers and it's a 2 ohm load on a Super Reverb. And there's an extension speaker jack, which means that if you run another cab along with your 2 ohm load, will you kill the amp? Well, here's the thing. If you were to use another Super Reverb cab as your load, it's 2 ohms and 2 ohms, you'd have a 1 ohm load. And the output transformer in your Super would be fine. It would behave pretty much as if you had a 16 ohm secondary selected and give it 8 ohm load. You're going to lose 3 dB from the mismatch, but you're also going to gain 3 dB from doubling the number of speakers you have, whatever it is. But most people aren't going to do that. Basically, a rule of thumb on old Fenders, and don't take this as, and therefore you should start doing this on purpose, but a mismatch one off in either direction is fine. So if you have a speaker, an amp with an 8 ohm output, and you run it into an 8 ohm cab, it's fine. If you run into a 16 ohm cab, it's fine. If you run into a 4 ohm cab, even, it's fine, though it's easier if it goes to the 16. What you don't want to do is have an amp rated for 4 ohms and use a 16 ohm cab, or have an amp rated for 16 ohms and use a 4 ohm cab. That's an offset of 2. That's asking for it. But remember, what I just said is very specific to Fenders back in the 60s and 70s with Schumachers, which were very rugged. And if you have any questions about that, don't do it. I'm curious to know how Fender got 75 watts from a pair of 6L6s and the Fender 75. I assume they did ultralinear. Should orange drops be oriented in a guitar? Makes no difference in a guitar. Are Fuchs amps good? Yes, they are. Butch Lauer, thank you, man. That's very nice. Favorite guitar cable? The one that I can find. Most of the guitar cables I use are Mogami W2924 and Neutrik plugs. I've got one Rogue monster cable floating around here that has popped up in some videos. People have made fun of me for using a monster cable. Some guy left it here. I don't even know who. If I knew, I'd return it to him, but it's here and it works. And sometimes it gets put to it. I would never buy one because they do fail. But I like Mogami and Switchcraft. I'm sorry, Mogami and Neutrik. If you like Canary and Switchcraft, you're right too. I have, as far as things like evidence, I don't want to get too far down that thing. There's no such thing as a directional cable because we're passing AC signals, and AC goes both ways. There is such a thing as a telescoped shield, which people mistake. So if you have a telescope shield and it's going to sound better with one orientation than the other in certain environmental factors come into play, but you may have quieter noise floor if the telescope is connected at the amp versus the guitar. So there's a lot of cross-pollination where you have a telescoped ground or telescope shield. People think that means that the cable is directional because it rejects noise better in one direction. That's not a directional cable. That's just a telescope shield, which doesn't really matter that much in most applications. I have new Fender Blues Junior. Is your fix for cooling to buy something the person with some soldering skills be able to do? Yeah, look on my Hot Rod and Blues playlist on my channel. In the Hot Rod and Blues playlist, there's a Blues Junior shows how to cool the bias, and there's another one shows how to remove hum from a lot of them without soldering. Can I compare a Lab Series 100-watt combo to any Fender style amp? No. Lab Series, my God, they're heavy. They have very unique sounds, but there's nothing in that circuit that compares to any Fender style amp. It is an amazing circuit. Basically, it's a very, very complex series of pedals. It's a lot of op amps and stuff and a lot of inductors. It's very convoluted. Sound can sound like garbage or can sound like God, depending on how good you are at using it. So unless you are just really chasing Ty Tiber from the 90s, from King's X, I don't know if it's really that, I don't think it's that useful to most people. It's a cool thing, but it's not this will work for every style of music thing, whereas a twin pretty much will. Cathode bias are popular in EL84, but less common in 6L6, 6V6. I'll tell you why. Because a cathode bias amp draws more current from the power transformer than a fixed bias amp does. And so when you have an amp like, you can do it at 6V6s or EL84s, and the current state draw from the power transformer is relatively low. You do the same thing with 34s or 6L6s, and that's a lot more to ask of the power transformer. So to do a cathode bias amp with that, you've got to have a more expensive iron to do what fewer people want. And then you combine that with the fact that most people, most companies are making cathode bias as a way to give us a simpler, slightly less expensive form factor for an amp in their range. And there's not a lot of difference between a 6V6 and an EL84 and how they behave when they're cathode biased. And the 84 costs less and is smaller and generates less heat. They're going to go with the 84 over the 6V6. But you could build a Vox AC30 with 6V6s if you wanted to. Would you please publish a generic list of basic amp maintenance tools and supplies? No. That's not what I have. I don't have time for that. Please need help making a Marshall 2160X not suck. I don't know what model that is, and I can't do remote fixes unless it's something I just know at the back of my hand, and I'm not familiar with that model. Do I swear much while doing repairs when camera is off? Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes people say I swear like a sailor, and I'll say, no, I cuss like a goddamn admiral. Anyway, Bob Moog, yeah, he was great. I was in Asheville, North Carolina earlier this summer, and I was walking down one of the main streets, and all of a sudden I came to the Moog Museum, and it was cool. B.B. King did like the Lab Series L5. I think they gave them to him, and they sounded loud and clean, and he liked both those things. But talk about someone who could plug into anything and sound like himself. It's B.B. King, man. How does Mojo Tone app make a handwire tweet or British blackout amp for $1,200 and pay their rent? I don't think that they do they? I think that's what the kits cost once you factor everything together. You'd have to ask Mojo Tone. I'm not there with them. Any opinions on Suramps, the Bella and Bella Reverb? John does fantastic products. He builds them to a very high quality level. They tend to sound very good. Play one. If you like the sound, it's right for you. If you don't like the sound, it's not. My Hot Rod Deluxe or DeVille seems to have weak bass. Any smoking guns? Smoking guns to look for. That's a pretty bassy circuit typically. You could have a problem in your speaker. You could have a problem in your speaker cable. First thing I do is find someone who had an external 2x12 and plug into that and see if everything's good. What is it about the vintage apps, old Transformers? Man, Crispy, those old Schumacher irons, the iron that Schumacher's made for 60s and 70s Fender is a big part of it. But the thing that's really hard to explain is the, let's see, what I can, well, let me get two things. I guess I'll use my fingers. All right. If you have two plate resistors and say a 66 deluxe reverb, they're like this on the board. I guess from your perspective, they'd be like this. They're a V. They make contact at their common point, which is the voltage source for them. And then when they go to the respective plates of the two triodes, they're almost an inch apart. I think it's typically about 0.8 to 0.85 inches apart. So it's a V. Same two resistors in a Fender reissue be next to each other, maybe an eighth of an inch apart from each other and parallel with each other. In a Mesa, they're jammed up against each other. When you have two components, the more space between them, I know I'm squinting so I can see my fingers because otherwise I get four fingers up in the air because of the light there. When you have space between components, as you increase that space, you get the space between them, you get exponential returns in lowering noise and lowering interference between the two. So if I have two resistors like this in a Mesa, and I move them that much to where they'd be in a Fender reissue, that gives as much benefit really as moving them this far, because the majority of the benefit comes in that first eighth inch to a quarter inch. But the farther you can do, the better. That's an example of two plate resistors. What really comes in is if you have, say, a plate resistor and a coupling cap for one stage right next to a different resistor for the next stage, and the two stages are out of phase with each other because they're inverting. As you go from one stage to the next, the signal inverts. So if you have a component from stage one jammed up against the component from stage two, like you have in a Mesa Boogie, you get all kinds of intermodulation, distortion, and noise. Separate them by an eighth of an inch to a Fender reissue, much better than the Mesa. Separate them by, half an inch to an inch, like you find in a 65 deluxe reverb 66, it goes down even more. So the space between components matters an awful lot. And people don't talk about that. Any way to EQ DSL 40 sound less boxy? DSL 40 shouldn't sound boxy. In fact, it's fairly mid-scooped amp typically. What speakers do you have in it? What shielded cable type brand do I connect to input? For my shielded cables inside amps, I use an RG176, I think it is. Anyway, I have to look it up. It's a Teflon interconductor with 22 gauge stranded silver wires. And then I have a braided shield over that, and then a clear jacket over that. And it has very low capacitance, but it doesn't have any handling noise. And it's the 22 gauge center conductor means that it doesn't want to break. And I like that. At what point did I feel comfortable charging for amp work? Oh, when they started working more than smoking. It took me a while to get there. I don't put it this way. I started off selling pedals before I started charging to do amp work. So I got my soldering skills together. You sit down to make 100 of these in a weekend, you get good, or you do something else. The funniest comment on directional cable was a geologist who claimed the crystalline structure was, yeah. Hey, John, I enjoy your comments, man. It's nice. I feel like you're giving me a much needed thumbs up sometimes when some of the crazy YouTube commenters are negative, and you're like, yeah, that's just how the world works, man. So I appreciate you being a voice of reason out there and of scientific background. Have I been playing any bass? Not very much, to my regret. I don't know if you guys remember earlier this year, I spent a couple of weeks with a wrist brace on a lot. And I found that, let's wait till you can see this. All right. I've got a friend who plays bass for a very well-known musician. I'm not going to name drop, but Andy plays with big names and has played with a lot of big names. And when someone at that level gives you advice on playing an instrument, you take it. And so he had me doing very specific things with the right hand, and as far as how to hold my hand, position my thumbs, and I follow through and rest strokes and all that, a lot of which I do incorporate. But he had me hold my hand in a very specific way that worked for him. And it really exacerbated an old injury that I had. And so if I play bass for too long properly, I have to put on the wrist brace again. And it really interferes with my ability to do work if this is all clamped up. So I play for my own enjoyment and to test amps, but I'm afraid that if I do the proper almost right angle wrist thing, I'm in agony. So I'm keeping it this kind of angle like this, which is kind of like an upright thing to do, which is a little bit sloppy. Anyway, so I play for fun and I enjoy it, but and it's good to be able to test a bass amp with a bass, but I'm afraid I'm never going to be able to put in the hours I planned on it because I can't spend the time away from work icing the wrist and having it all braced up. It's all right. Andy's already got those gigs. I'm just never going to get them. Speaking of writing novels, some of your favorite novels. As a librarian, I'd be curious to hear. Boy. I'm trying to decide which Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Probably 100 Years of Solitude. Sound and the Fury, Faulkner. I find myself always going back maybe every decade to Huck Finn. I like John Irving. I liked him a lot more when I was younger, but I still think A Prayer for Owen Meany is really, really good. I'm a huge Tolkien fan, but I wouldn't consider, at the risk of offending people, I think Tolkien is to literature as the Bible is to literature. They both are, and they, at the same time, they're not. That's not the point of those works. As far as the structure of Tolkien, it's a terrible structure, and the point of view is, it's something of transcendent beauty that no editor would ever accept today or publish as is. But there are same thing can be said for the Bible. There are some things which just are. Man, trying to think of something worth pointing out that people don't necessarily know. Anyway, I'll think about that. I like so many good authors, but when you ask me about a favorite, that's hard to choose. I also have a big fond spot for Connecticut Yankee, just because it's so ornery. Rob Robinette, yeah, Rob's a good guy. I've known him for a little bit. It took forever to get him to correct the Lyle Caldwell mod he had on there that was not at all what I ever suggested, but that's just part of the internet thing. Internet a 69 Bandmaster Reverb. Oh, yeah, it's a good amp. It's a twin or Showman with only two 6L6s. No problem with a Bandmaster. I don't have any experience with a Trim Lord. Tube rattle or chassis vibration on Hot Rod Deluxe. Chassis vibration. Look at the video I did on the Mike Landau. All the chassis hardware was damaged. All the hardware holding the baffle to the cabinet was damaged. You know, all the speaker screws were loose. You've got to get all that stuff. Staple Singers, yeah. Thanks, Daryl. I'm a big fan of Staple Singers. That's David Hood on the bass on that. Down the Muscle Shoals guys. Yeah. Any experience, good or bad, with Divided by 13 or Third Power? No experience with Third Power. I'd like to see inside one. Also, the Three Monkeys, but I've just never had one in. Divided by 13s I've had in. I was not impressed by the build or I would consider over-optimistic view of how secondaries work. I'm not going to get into slamming an amp unless I have an example here to show you. So try playing your bass with a pick, much more relaxed angle. Yeah, I know how to play with the bass with a pick. I don't enjoy it. That's not the sound I like unless I'm trying to do a sting kind of thing. But I prefer the sound and feel of bass played with fingers. I've never seen the Allman Brothers live. I was at an Allman Brothers concert, but I was not watching them because it was an outdoor festival called Memphis in May. And I think it was Allman Brothers. It might have been Skinnerd. Anyway, it was one of those big outdoor concerts, and they had two stages at either end of this giant field. And at one end was either Allman Brothers or Skinnerd. I don't remember which. I think Allman Brothers. And at the other end was Public Enemy. And that was the night that the results of the Rodney King verdict came out. And I found myself right between two sections of crowd that were having some different reactions to the Rodney King verdict. And that was not a place I wanted to be. Though personally, I would have been with the Public Enemy side on that. But I decided that it was not a place I needed to stick around to see what was going to happen next. So I got the hell out of there. 16 or 2x8. What do I think of Robert Henson's builds? I'm not going to say that on the internet. I think he's enthusiastic. I'm not a fan of Wuthering Heights. I'm not a fan of the Brontes. And Beat Generation, no, never did anything for me. Modern tube Portaflexes, haven't worked on any of those. You got a cathode bias B15 that's red plating. Look at the cathode bias resistor. Look at the tubes. What's causing, what is the plate voltage? What is the screen voltage? What is the voltage of the cathode? That's your thing. Siddhartha is my least favorite novel to pronounce. I've never read it. I need to read it. Hermann Hesse has been on my list. I just haven't gotten to it. I will check it out, though, when I find some time. I lifted a trace off the board when repairing a tube screamer. It works. Should you glue it back down or just leave it? I would try to sister in a bit of a suitable bus wire to reinforce that area and take it as a lesson learned. Any update on the speaker consultation video? I'm waiting for the G12 CS to arrive. And then I'm going to get in and change the tone stack. Not tone stack, but the tone circuit, because the taper of that pot is terrible. Difference between a microphonic tube and a leaking cap in terms of the noise they make. If you tap on it, does it go ping, 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 ping? That's microphonic. If you have a leaking tube, tapping on the tube, leaking cap, tapping on the tube won't do anything. You're just going to have a hum and a buzz and some sourness. What benefit does the post-phase inverter cathode follower bring to an app design and Dumbo? Yeah, it's coming out of the SVT, but basically a steel string swing or whatever is just an SVT output section. Literally, in some cases, you get more current swing. You can get more output while we're staying cleaner. It gets complicated. Pro Reverb is one of the best amps Fender ever made. I just find them too damn heavy. You have a V-type in your DSL-40 and you find your DSL-42 MIDI. See if you can play your DSL-40 through some external speakers and see if the speakers, what you're hearing. Because the DSL-40 tends to be a fairly scooped sounding amp. Yeah, Brad, it was not a good place to be in between those two crowds. I actually went to see Public Enemy on the what was the tour? Welcome to the Terror Dome. I was one of maybe 6 white guys there, and no problems, and it was awesome. It was awesome. I'm just I don't really care about Flavor Flav, but Chuck D has got such a great voice, both literally and in terms of what he was saying and expressing. And Terminator X, man, it's all about Terminator X. I listen to a lot of different kinds of music. Do I think modern boutique style amps will ever be on par with the vintage amps? The good ones will. The good ones already are. Treble is, there's so many things marketed as a boutique amp. You know, I got some crap from showing that bad tweed style Fender thing on the amps under 1,000 videos, amps to watch out for. But that was marketed as a hand-built, hand-wired boutique amp, and it was garbage. You know, it's hard. Is that bonerhead Elon Musk going to ruin Twitter? Well, I try to stay away from politics on here. I'm not sure that Twitter was ever that great to begin with, but I certainly will not be buying anything from Mr. Musk going forward personally. Thank you, Ben. I appreciate that. How far over an amp's rated wattage would you go when choosing a speaker? You got to look at peak versus RMS. I would say, unless you are chasing a sound that involves a speaker really being pushed hard, and unless you're okay with occasionally replacing a speaker as a result, double it. So, you know, Deluxe Reverb is a 22 watt amp. I use 65 watt speakers in those all day long, and they sound fantastic. It moves just fine. If I were to put a 120 watt speaker in there, the cone wouldn't have enough excursion. If I put a 30 watt speaker in there, it may not last. And I've had that happen because that 22 watts in a Deluxe Reverb is measured at the onset of clipping. And you turn it up past that, the amp still puts out signal past that 22 watts. And you can get peaks that exceed 30 watts. And so you've blown your speaker. So doubling is a safe thing. So round up to the next easy thing for math. So 22 watts, 25 watts, 50 watts. You want a 50 watt or higher speaker. But don't quadruple it. So 50 watts and up, good. 100 watts and up, too much. The cone won't move enough. When was the last? Well, last time I got zapped working on an app. A couple months back, I was working on some 60s or 70s Fender, and like a dumbass, I forgot that I hadn't switched off my receptacle on the wall, even though the amp was powered off. And I was just reaching over to do something, and I leaned like right here on the rear chassis, and just touched the hot on the power switch. And the tingle means it's working. And it's kind of a startling thing, but it's AC, it's not DC. And I was just getting hot directly to the chassis ground, so I was bridging a very short path, not through my body to something over there, but just from that switch to the chassis. So it's scared me more than anything. But I have done that kind of stupid thing enough that anytime I get like an arm hair snagged on the metal edge of a chassis, which happens all the time, for that split moment, Elizabeth, it's the big one, just for that second. But I take great care not to get zapped. It's those little things that will get you. Celestia Neo versus the original Creambacks. I've not heard the Neo Creamback, though I've heard good reports about it. I have never heard to date a Neo speaker that I like, but I have not used all of them or heard all of them. Do we prefer the sound of amps using tube or diode rectification? Does not matter. A good designer can get you a great sound with either. Favorite Metallica or metal in general song? I don't enjoy metal. Tool. If you think Tool is metal, then Tool. I don't think Alice in Chains is metal. I don't think Tool is as far as I go. The Metallica I always thought was for the 14-year-old boys writing or carving things on their school desks. They're lyrically, they're just pathetic. Sorry, I know people love it, but I read Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I'm not going to take James Hetfield's poetry too seriously. Is it a myth that people would cut their speaker cones to get distortion? It was not a myth, but people didn't do it too often, because once you do it, it dies. One documented, one reputed. The rumor is that Dave Davies slashed his speaker with a razor to get the sound on all day and all the night. Of course, I can also get that sound out of an unslashed AC30 if I turn the gain up and the tone stack all the way down. And also the rumor is that was actually Jimmy Page. No one will ever really know. What I do know happened is Ike Turner, yes, the Ike Turner, as in former Mr. Tina, back when he was doing the Ike Turner. What band was he with? They did Delta 88 or old. I can't remember the name of the song. Is Cut Here Memphis over at Sun, and it's the first instance of distorted guitar on record. They had a hole in the speaker, and they stuffed some newspaper in it. And Rocket 88, thank you, Andy. Rocket 88, I could sing it, but I'll spare you that. But yeah, Rocket 88 is like 51, 52. Had a hole in the speaker, stuffed it with newspaper. That buzzing makes that track. Check it out. Shave your arm hairs. No. 67 Pros, reverb squeals like a pig above 3. Filter caps, could be. Pro reverb, and most of the Fender reverb amps, except for the Princeton, V4's cathode is shared between the reverb recovery stage and the next gain stage, and they're out of phase with each other. And if that coupling cap, if the bypass cap on V4B fails, you will have that kind of squeal in the reverb return. So before changing filter caps, I would make sure that the V4 cathode bypass cap is good, and that should be a 22 or 25 microfarad. Hey, Boston guitarist. What's my favorite bass amp circuit? To play, SVT. To pick up, a B15. Yeah, Red Fox reference. That's probably the only Fox reference on YouTube at the moment, but I'm glad to have been here for it. Man, Sanford and Son. That theme song is up. That's that's why am I not remembering anyone's name tonight? That theme was done by the genius who produced all the Michael Jackson stuff, Quincy Jones. Yeah, the Sanford and Son theme is a Quincy Jones everything. Wrote, produced, arranged, and it's phenomenal. I also love Barney Miller, as you guys know. RCD or something similar. I don't know what RCD is. Rumble's after Delta 88. Any reason to use a steel chassis? Yeah. If your transformers are really heavy, steel's stronger than aluminum. They sound slightly different in some circuits. Did I listen to Rick Dees? No, I hated Rick Dees, especially after Disco Duck. And then he went national and was just smarmy. Steve O'Neill talking about upside down labels on combos. Well, some combos were designed back in the day when musicians played in orchestras and guitarists sat behind stands in front of them. So the amp is supposed to be in front of you, facing the audience, and the labels are facing you. And so that's how the old stuff in the 40s and 50s were designed. And it was just how amps were up to like 61 for the most part. AC30s continue to be that way. And now people have the blues and hot rod recreations of that. What is something every amp owner should do that most people aren't aware of? The number one thing, keep it clean, keep your hardware tight, don't use it as a coaster. Quincy Jones and Mike Post, was he involved with Sanford Son as well? I know Quincy Jones did it. So Jerry Germot on bass. He round all the way back to Peter Gabriel now with Jerry Germot. Are you having my channels become popular? No. How dare you give me attention and your time and money? Thanks, guys. No, I'm every day I'm just weirded out by this. It's not like I'm gonna be retiring off this, but it has grown very quickly in the past year, and I'm very grateful, and I try to be very humble about it. I don't know why this has worked for me, and other people doing very similar things are still getting 1 or 2,000 subscribers and their brothers. I'm very grateful to have whatever audience I have, and I feel that I have some responsibility to whatever I've been doing right so far. That's what I need to stick with. So while I've upgraded some camera stuff, and I've got lighting rigs. I can control the horizontal and the vertical and stuff like that. I'm still not trying to be a YouTube personality or any of that stuff. I just make it look and sound better for you guys as much as possible. Speaking of staying real, I gotta pee. Give me just a minute. So you talk amongst yourselves. Well, I'm back, and I'm a little mortified that I actually said P in front of the world. Older me would never have said P, but having kids changes your vocabulary. My kids are in their early 20s now, so it doesn't come up, but just that whole period of having to say pee and potty and tinkle and all that. I'm glad I didn't say tinkle. But now my wife and I have a almost 4-year-old lab puppy, and so you need to go potty. So I'm glad I didn't say I have to go potty. But actually, she's looking at me now. Speaking of which, I'm going to have to go take her to go potty in a little bit. So we've been doing this for 2 hours and 20 minutes. Let's do another 10 minutes. And I'll try to get a few more questions in. And, I'm trying not to ramble too much. Thanks, Lee. Sir makes really high quality everything. I've never had any problem with a Sir product. They're great. I did never take an electronics class at all, and I've never had one-on-one training with anyone in this field. Actually, John Suhr was one of a few people who were kind of mentors to me in a way, in that they would say, you need to read this, or look into this, look up this thing, learn about this. And so someone who's ahead of you in the industry tells you that, you go and you find the book and you read the thing and you think about it and you learn it. And then, you don't say, what do you mean? Why should I do that? This is going to be really tangential for some of you and very crucial for others. I've been on a lot of forums, and I have a lot of friends who are very well-known names in the industry. And there'll be a forum, and someone will ask a question, and someone like John Suhr or Bruce Agnator or Andy Fuchs will answer their question. And then the guy who had to ask how to change a tube will argue with them and say, that's not what I read, or blah, blah, blah. And they're full of attack. It's like they think their 4chan stuff works in the real world. And so what happens? The guys like John Suhr and Bruce Agnator and Andy Fuchs and myself, if I can include myself in that group, we stop participating in these forums where we are trying to help people, because people attack us for knowing what we know. So when I was in the position of starting out, and John Suhr would spend 5 minutes to tell me about his approach to X, Y, or Z, or had a Klaus Jensen, I believe is in Denmark, gave me some real good advice on some circuit stuff. When they would give me this information, I would thank them for it. I would listen to every word they said, and then I'd go read. I'd study. I'd do the math. I would apply it to my own life. I never argued with them, because there used to be a master apprentice thing. It's like a guild. And I think right now I'm in a very advanced journeyman. And some of the true masters are still around, but they cannot maybe pick up amps anymore. John's not ancient. John's a master, but he's gotten to the point where he doesn't have to work on anyone else's apps now. Yeah, watching people argue with Rick Turner. I've seen stuff like that happen. Do you not recognize the name? Because you're making a complete idiot of yourself. And what happens is, when groups get taken over by the guys who treat everything like it's 4chan or whatever, the people who actually have the information that they want to get leave. I don't spend as much time on those forums as I used to, and I'm a moderator on some of them. I'm an admin, and the people tell me I'm an idiot because I don't believe in this or that or whatever they read about. Yeah, Dunning-Kruger is a true thing. Hit Metalworks is Tone Talk on 11.4. I thought I was a Tone Talk on 11.4. I don't have much experience with Randall amps. I'm sorry. Have I worked on Blackheart amps? No, just Joan Jett. I wouldn't do any Fromel mods to anything because it's the wrong approach to getting an amp to sound differently. That's a long subject. I've already discussed the Fromel and the Bill M stuff earlier in this live chat. Go back and watch from the beginning. I'm sorry I can't tell you how far into it. Are some effects loops just too strong for some pedals? Yeah, absolutely. Some are at line level. And there's line level and there's pedal level. But there are actually 3 tiers of it. There's balanced line level, which is plus 4 dB. There's unbalanced line level, which is negative 10 dB. And there's instrument level, which is negative 30 dB. And so an effects loop, which is at line level, typically unbalanced negative 10 for most guitar amps, will distort the hell out of a lot of pedals. So you have to have a pedal that can handle that input, or you have to have an effects loop that has an attenuation on the send and then clean makeup gain on the return. It gets complicated. Sometimes you have to say, oh, well, I can't use that pedal, I'll use something else. Diane-Kruger syndrome. That'd be a terrible thing. I don't marinate in my caps. I'll tell you what, I know you're joking about marinating caps. One of my pet peeves is people who marinate steak. It just breaks down the entire structure. Everything changes, the texture changes. It doesn't retain moisture anymore. It's a great way to ruin a steak. It's for people who really like the taste of pineapple juice and soy sauce as opposed to steak. If I have any vegetarian or vegan fans, mad respect to you. But if you're going to kill a cow and eat its delicious flesh, make sure it stays delicious. Don't make it taste like canned pineapple. Yeah, I was on Music Maker's Guitar back in Usenet, and I was on Huge Racks Inc. and stuff. Hey, Jason. Thanks for joining us. Jason Tong, by the way, for those of you who don't know him, he's a really good tech in Australia. Seems to be a lot of good Australian techs. We got Six, we got Jason, we got, what's his name? Brad. And Jason is with, Jason, tell us your company name. I know it. I couldn't remember freaking Quincy Jones's name earlier. I'm just spacing all these things. Headfirst Amplifications. Headfirst. Yeah, Jason is with Headfirst Amps. If you're into more high gain stuff than I do, that's his métier. Real good player, real good tech, real knowledgeable. So if you want to know more about that end of the stuff, well, I cover some of that. That seems to be his focus. More power to him. He does it well. Flank steak's good. It's overpriced these days. It used to be much less expensive, but I still like it marinated. I like it cooked the right way. It's a tricky thing to do. But ribeye and porterhouse, and I do a reverse sear. We'll do another night talking just about just that. Thanks, Grandpa. Now I will do flank steak, maybe like fajitas, if I don't want to do it outside on the grill, or I'll start on the grill and finish it in a pan with a sauce that you make with peppers and stuff at the last. peppers and garlic and onions and all kinds of stuff. And the steak will take it up. But there's a difference between having a sauce towards the end or meat halfway through the cooking process or marinating it. And it just breaks it down. Yeah, I mean, skirt and flank steak, if you cook them really hot and correctly, it can be really good. Salut from Montreal. Thank you. Bonsoir, Grandpa. I've never played an Epiphone Swingster. Yeah, if the bridge pickup has got a really small cap on it on the tone circuit, you'll get that Cocteau effect. Yeah, Uncle Meat. I should not argue with anyone named Uncle Meat on this subject, but yeah, oven first and grill. I'll bring it up to about 115 in a 200-degree oven, and then let it rest while it comes up to about 130. And then I finish either on the grill or, if it's raining, on a cast iron skillet set really hot, and it's fantastic. $5150 block letter, too flubby on the low end. Man, a 5150 is a bright ass amp. I think the block letter does or does not have the resonance. If the resonance is turned off, that thing doesn't have much low end. So something else is in your something else is going wrong with your amp. Thanks, Ari. Pitts S2C1, is that Grenada, Spain, or Grenada, Mississippi? Static from the reverb. Oh, that could be a lot of stuff. I'd have to have the Ampere. First thing to do is swap the tubes. If it goes away, it was a tube. If it's still there, it's something else. Line 6 spider valve. No, thank you. No experience with Thorcraft. Oh, Raymond Feist. I like Raymond. He's very much connect the dots by the book, though. And that whole series went off the rails, but I would say he's very pleasant, but there's no surprises. He does love his tropes. Fat switch not working. It's bad switch or broken solder joint or faulty resistor or faulty cathode bypass cap. It's a really simple switch. It's a really simple circuit. Any good tech could fix that really quickly. If you have a meter, look at the schematic and look at what the switch does and figure out what should be changing in the different positions. And if you need more instructions than that, you need to take it to a tech and make sure you do this while the amp's unplugged and discharged. Crate tube amps. Why does that keep coming up? People keep asking about crates. They have good ones and they have bad ones. A lot of bad ones. The Club and the V series from the 90s are pretty good. 65 amps, for the most part, were very, very good. I've had some design differences with them, but they were easily remedied. I don't know what happened to that company. They were seeming about to conquer the world, and they just kind of went away. I follow Dan Bull on Facebook, but I don't think he knows who I am. I would love to ask him, be a fly on the wall, see what happened there. Bad Cat, hand wired. For that money, they're the brands I prefer. Service on an amp in my shop. If someone brings an app in locally, it gets to pretty quickly. The issue is I have so many apps that I'm still finishing from the parts delay that started in 2020. I don't feel comfortable taking any more apps in that have been shipped to me for a while because I can't guarantee a turnaround. Uh, so I'm waiting to get caught up before I accept more stuff. And what speaker I recommend for the 68 Viber champ? Yeah, the G10C is going to be fantastic with that, but don't spend too much because odds are the amp won't make it. You're looking for a good amp tech in or near Denmark. Klaus Jensen, I believe it's Jensen or Jensen. You'll know better than I. Klaus with a C. I believe he's in Denmark. He's fantastic. If I had to buy a Forever amp from a big box store, what would I get? I don't know. Trouble with buying from Sweetwater or something like that is that they call you for the rest of your life. A Forever amp. I've never met a Forever amp. I mean, I see them when they're. Every time I see an amp, I'm reminded that they're rarely forever, but they can always be fixed. It depends on your budget, depends on your style. The guy who plays country would not be happy with the Marshall and vice versa. Could you design overdrive pedal? Sounds good with a J120. All I've tried sound terrible with that app. Well, if you want to get the authentic JC120 sound, get a Boss heavy metal pedal, and you will sound like Adrian Belew at his most disciplined era. But between this amp and the speaker, a no overdrive really sounds good into a JC120. Trust me, I used to try. Are tubes going to be obsolete due to production issues in the near future? Not in the near future, no. We've got Putin's nonsense messing up the supply from Russia. So that's Sovtech, Electro-Harmonics, Tungsol, Mullard are not going to be available for a while, and some others. Still, JJ Slovakian plant was really hit hard by COVID, but they're playing catch up. The Shuagang factory in China suffered a fire that is essentially being rebuilt, but a second Chinese company, Pisvane, started up. In addition to selling tubes under their own name, they have been making quite good 6L6s and EL34s under the Tube App Doctor brand. So between the JJs and the Pisvane stuff, things are getting better, and they will continue to get better as whatever. Shuagang will get rebuilt, and either the awfulness in Ukraine will end and we'll get Russian tubes again, or things will get so bad that none of us will be thinking about tubes. I try to avoid divisive political issues on here, but fuck some Putin. Karsten, it's Klaus Holmes Jensen. That'll help you find him. Klaus Holmes Jensen. Matt Johnson, amen. Western Electric is building a tube manufacturing factory. I assume they're going to be making guitar amp tubes because there are not a lot of other things that use them. I don't know whether any of us will be able to afford them. Man, Ari, when you say something that should be obvious, it means that there's usually going to be about 40% of the population that says, well, no, that's not how I view it at all. And living in Memphis, I'm outnumbered most days. So I'll just leave it with that. Any Houston techs I can recommend? I don't know anyone at Houston. Actually, I've had really good luck with some people at Sweetwater. I'm trying to get back to the Excalibur. I'm waiting to get some faceplates from a potential new vendor and everything has been a little bit crazy. I said I was going to end this at 10:30, and now it's almost 10:40. And I hung out for a little bit longer because Jason had just joined, and I wanted to send everyone to check out Jason's stuff at Head First. He's real good tech. But I've got some other stuff I've got to do. And it's been 2 hours and 40 minutes. So I'm just amazed that all you guys have been here and so into this. And thank you very much for spending your evening with me. And I know that half the time I'm looking just slightly to the side of eye contact because all the chat stuff's on my iPad here. So that's how I've been seeing you. I need to get it, more like a teleprompter up there so that, I can see it and you think I'm looking at you like the talking heads do. But I don't have any way to hold it up there. So it's been sitting on a step ladder along with my drag. So thanks so much, guys. Have a good night.